The third characteristic I've listed here about play is that play is guided by mental rules. Now, people often talk about unstructured play, and by that they really mean free play, that the children are not being told how to play by some adult. But as I've said earlier, if the children are being told how to play, then by my definition, it's not play. So it doesn't make any sense to talk about unstructured play as play that, is kind of redundant if you're just using unstructured play to mean it's not structured by some adult outside who's imposing structure on the play. I'm arguing that all play actually is structured, and it's structured by the children themselves. Play is never random activity. It's not completely random activity. Children making a sandcastle, they have a rule in mind. I'm making a sandcastle. I'm doing something. They're not just piling up sand randomly. They have some structure of what they're doing in mind. Children who are playing a fantasy game, playing what researchers call sociodramatic play, who are playing house or playing superheroes, they have rules in mind. I have to act. If I'm the baby or I'm the mommy or I'm Wonder Woman, I have to act like the baby or the mommy or Wonder Woman, or by my conception and my playmate's conception of what that person would do, how that person would behave. And if you don't act that way, you will be reminded by your playmates, hey, you're not acting like Wonder Woman right now. Wonder Woman, you've fallen down and skinned your knee and you start to cry. Wonder Woman wouldn't cry, right? So you can't cry as long as you're Wonder Woman unless you take time out, and then you could cry, and then you could go back later on to being Wonder Woman. So the point is that children, whatever they're playing, they have to follow rules. Imagine even children, think of a couple of boys roughhousing. They seem to be hitting one another. They're chasing one another around. They're wrestling. They're swinging sticks at one another. They're doing all this kind of thing in play, not in real fighting, but play fighting. The difference between a play fight and a real fight is the play fight has rules, and the real fight doesn't. The rules might not be stated, but if one of them violates the rules, the other one will clearly state them. No kicking, no biting, no scratching, no hitting hard. If you're going to throw the other person, you have to throw them onto something soft. Play fighting is always an exercise in constraint, as all of play is. It's always an exercise in being able to overcome any kind of urge to do something that violates the rules of play and being able to follow the rules. The great Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky argued his view of the most important thing that children learn in play, which I might put as the second most important thing, is how to follow rules. Children, one of the characteristics of we human beings is everywhere we live, in every situation that we're in, every social situation, we have to abide by the social expectations of what's appropriate or not appropriate. And children are practicing that all the time in play as they follow the structure of the play that they're in. The fourth characteristic that I've listed here is that play always involves at least some element of imagination. So play has rules, but the rules always leave lots of room for creativity within them. That's even true in formal games, or if we take this would probably not be a game that preschool kids would play, but just to take an example of a game we might all know something about is chess. So chess is a formal game. It has very clear rules, very clear things that you cannot do. But there's a million things you can do. There's a million kinds of choices you can make. So there's always some creative element in the game of chess. And that's true really for all play. If the rules are so tight and so restricted that every move is determined for you, then it's not play. Then we might call it ritual instead of play. So play always involves creativity, and it always involves a degree of imagination. Children always understand that when they're playing, they're stepping out of the real world for the purpose of play. Most kinds of play have time in and time out. Time in, you're in the play world. Time out, you're back to the real world so that you can tie your shoe or go to the bathroom or correct your playmate or cry because you skinned your knee or whatever it is that you have to do in the real world before you go back to the play world where you're following these rules of play. So play is how children exercise the ability for imagination, how they develop their creative potentials. So the fifth characteristic of play that I have on the handout is that it is conducted in an alert, active, but non-stressed frame of mind. This characteristic, sometimes I only talk about 4 characteristics because this characteristic really falls naturally from the other 4. It's a consequence of the other 4. So play you have to be alert and active in play because play is always guided by rules. Play is mentally constructed. You can't be passive in play. You're no longer a player if you're not paying attention to the rules, if you're not controlling your own behavior, you're not thinking about what you're doing. So play always involves an active and alert mind. But the mind is not overly stressed. Now, sometimes it's a little stressed, like climbing that tree high to create a little bit of a sense of fear. But it is stress that you yourself are in control of because you can always come back down. The fear gets too much, you can come back down. That's very different from if some gym teacher is making you climb to the top of a rope or something like that. That can be terrifying. But you're doing it on your own, you're doing it with only friends there, nobody's judging you, there's no shame in coming down. You are controlling the situation. So play does not involve a lot of stress because of a number of reasons. First of all, it doesn't count. There's no trophy on the line. You're not going to disappoint anybody if you don't do well. Nobody's going to criticize you because adults aren't paying attention to it if you don't do well. It all takes place in an imaginary world, so the consequences don't count even if there are consequences. So that is the characteristic of play, is that it doesn't count, and therefore in play, you are free to try new things that you don't dare try in the real world because you might flub up, you might not do it well. Play is where you're free to try new things precisely because it doesn't count, precisely because nobody's evaluating it. As soon as we take it and put it into a situation where it's being evaluated, so for example, we take children's natural ways of playing kickball or whatever they want to play, and we turn it into an organized adult-directed game of soccer that's being evaluated, then we take away that aspect of play that it is not being evaluated, and therefore you're free to try all sorts of new things. So because on E here, I make what I think is the primary, the most interesting paradox of play. That play is trivial, and it's precisely because it's trivial that it's so powerful. It's because it doesn't count. It's because children are not stressed in it that children are able to learn so much in play. The play world, this world that children step into when they're playing, is a simulation world. It's a place where they can practice skills that they might later use in the real world, but because it's not the real world, they're free to fail, and therefore they're free to practice. It's a safe place to try things out. And if we take that away from children, and they're always in situations where they're being evaluated, then they don't have this opportunity to try things that they're not sure that they can do, try things that are hard for them. So play is trivial, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It's trivial in that it doesn't count. It's not producing anything. It's not getting you food. It's not improving your resume. It's not getting you gold stars. It's not getting you all those kinds of things that we adults think of as so important in the world. What it is doing is it's giving you the opportunity to practice skills, to do things, to try out things, to try out ways of being, to see how it feels to do that, to see if you can do it. One of the things about play is it's often very repetitive. Children do the same thing over and over and over again. And that's part of the evidence that is practice. They're doing it until they get it right. They're doing it in somewhat different ways over and over again. So I think that's the most important thing for us to understand about play, is that because it doesn't count, it is the place where children are free to try new things, free to learn, free to do things that they would be tense about doing, and therefore not doing very well if they were being evaluated for doing it. So play is trivial, but it is not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because as soon as an activity becomes easy, it's no longer fun. So to keep it fun, children keep raising the level of difficulty of whatever it is they're playing. And this is true for all kinds of play. So imagine a little toddler who is playfully walking back and forth between a table here and a chair over there. That kind of walking that toddlers are doing as they're learning to walk, that's play. They're doing it in a playful mode. They're doing it under their own steam. They're not having, nobody has to push them to do it. In fact, if you push them to do it, then it's no longer play and they're not having fun anymore and they're less likely to do it. So the child is playing in that way, but once walking becomes easy for the child, then the child doesn't play that way anymore. Now the child goes on to some more complicated form of locomotor play, maybe running or skipping or jumping or climbing stairs. The child keeps moving to more and more difficult levels of whatever kind of play the child is involved in. Or imagine teenagers playing a video game. They don't stupidly keep playing at the same level of the game. Once they've figured out how to play that level of the game, they go on to higher and higher and higher levels. That's one of the reasons computer games are so attractive, is because there's no end to how difficult and complex, cognitively complex the game can be. And so teenagers, as they're playing, or kids of any age really, as they're playing, and adults too, as they're playing these video games, we think they're getting addicted to the video game, but what they're really doing is they're getting good at it and they're becoming better enough at it that now they're going to higher and higher levels. And they don't get tired of it because there's no end to how difficult it can be. Or if we take that example of Einstein that I gave earlier, that he didn't continue to solve the same kind of problem over and over again. He would have just been a bureaucrat, an accountant or something, if he was always solving the same kind of problem. That was no fun for him. That would have just been tedious. Once he figured out one kind of problem, he needed to go on to another kind of problem, a more difficult problem, or a new problem, one that he hadn't solved, in order to keep it fun, in order to keep it within the realm of play. So one thing we can be sure about play is that when we see children playing, when they're playing in their own steam, in their own ways, they are almost always at the cutting edge of their ability. They are almost always testing themselves. How much farther can I go in climbing this tree, or running this race, or solving the problems involved in this computer game, or whatever else it is in their play. So now let me just see how much time there is. There's a few minutes left. I want to spend now a few minutes on F on your handout. The special value of age mixed play. And I'm going to save G, sort of the review of what I've talked about, and also save A, the long-term harm, for a portion of the workshop this afternoon. But I want to say a little bit about age mixed play. Much of my own research is on the value of not segregating children by age, the value of allowing children of various ages to mix freely with one another and play together. Unfortunately, our school system segregates children by age. And I'm sure that in the schools that you're involved in and the daycare centers that you're involved in, you have just young children, you don't have older children. It'd be nice if you could do it with older children there too, because my observations and the research I've collected from what other people have done indicate that children actually learn more from older children than they do from adults. Children are really interested in older children. They pay attention to them, and especially they're interested in children who are just a little bit older themselves, maybe 2 or 3 years older than themselves, a little more advanced. Not so much advanced that they're in a different league, but they're doing things that I look at that and I think, wow, that's amazing, but I could do that. I could maybe do that. And so I am drawn up to want to do that. I study children in a setting where there are children age 4 on through teenage years, all mixed together all day long. This is a school that doesn't segregate children by age. And what I see is that most of the learning occurs because the children are interacting and playing with children of other ages. So but I think this applies even within the daycare setting, even for children, say from 2 to 5 years old. I think that amount of age mixing has an enormously valuable effect for all concerned. So I want to just say a few words about what younger children learn from older children when they're playing together, what older children learn from younger children when they're playing together, and how age-mixed play differs in positive ways from when children are playing with others who are all the same age. So whenever children are playing across ages, and there's a big enough difference in their size, in their ability, in their wisdom, and so forth, the older children are always drawing the younger children up to a higher level of play. The younger children are not drawing the older children down. It just goes in the other way. So imagine some 4 and 5-year-olds playing a game, a sociodramatic game, a game of house. And imagine that there's a 3-year-old or even a 2-year-old who wants to join them. The 3-year-olds or the 2-year-olds all by themselves wouldn't really be able to do this because they can't structure it well enough. They haven't developed the ability to negotiate, the ability to figure things out, the ability to think things through. But the older children who have developed that can draw them into this. They can remind them, so you're the baby, and as the baby, this is what you're supposed to do, and so on and so forth. So now, the younger children, who if they were just with other younger children, could not truly play socially. They would play in what's called parallel play, can now truly play socially because the older children engage them in that social play. In the setting that I am involved in, there are some children who can read and other children who can't read. They often play games together that involve reading. And what happens is the older children are, in essence, teaching the younger ones how to read so they can read the words on the screen or they can read the words that are involved in the play. Oftentimes they're playing games that involve keeping score. And I've seen older children teaching younger children how to add so they can keep score in the game, what the numbers mean. And it's so much more meaningful when the children are learning those things in that kind of a context. I would argue that in all realms, physical play, intellectual play, and so on, the younger children are learning from older children. I have a colleague, David, not a close colleague, but a person whose work I know and we often talk together, who's an anthropologist who's probably the world's expert on how children learn across cultures. And he says that the primary way that, by and large, children learn from other children. And they learn from interacting, playing with other children in age-mixed settings. The idea of segregating children by age is really a modern idea that came about with modern schooling. And unfortunately, we apply that nowadays even outside of schooling. We segregate children by age increasingly. And at least in the United States, as pure, free neighborhood play has declined, there's less and less opportunity for this kind of age mixing to occur. Younger children, even if they're not playing with the older children, learn just by watching the older children. They see older children do these things, and then they want to do them. It's not very meaningful to a 5-year-old to see that adults read books, right? I mean, adults do all kinds of strange things. They're a completely different animal from I am if I'm 5 years old. But if I am 5 years old and I see 7-year-olds reading and talking and laughing and enjoying comic books or whatever it is that they're reading, wow, I want to do that. I want to join those cool 7-year-olds and being able to do that. I am now motivated to read because I've seen these somewhat older kids do it. And that applies to tree climbing and it applies to all sorts of activities. In addition to that, older children, even 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds interacting with younger children are caregivers, and they're learning to be caregivers. And the extra care that the younger children are getting makes it easier for the adults around because the older children are doing some of that care. And they are better at caregiving than many of us think that they are. In many cultures, and I'm sure in many places in India, it's not uncommon for 5-year-olds to take care of their younger siblings while their parents are away. That's really amazing when you think about it, that 5-year-olds can do that. But yet there's a lot of studies, cross-cultural studies, showing that they can do that. And if we allow them to do it in our nursery schools and preschools, they become better at it, and the younger children appreciate it, and it makes it easier for the adults involved. So what are the older children learning? They're learning how to be caregivers. They're learning that they can actually, they're not always at the receiving end of help. They can give help, and what an important thing to learn. They're learning something about their own maturity. They're learning through teaching. When they explain how to add to a younger child who doesn't know how to add, and they're playing a game that involves adding, they're kind of consolidating in their own mind what it is to add, how it is to add. Just anybody who's taught knows that you learn more by teaching than you do by being taught, because you have to articulate it in a way that somebody else understands it, and when you do that, you consolidate it in your own mind. So my argument is that the older children are learning at least as much as the younger children in this in age-mixed play. So the other thing that I've observed, and there's actually a little bit of other research on this, there's not a whole lot of research on age-mixed play, is that age-mixed play is generally more nurturing, more helpful, less competitive than when children are the same age. If you're playing across ages, you know, and you're the older one, there's no big deal in beating or showing you're better than the younger one. And if you're the younger one, there's no point in trying to beat the older one. So you're playing just to have fun. You're stretching your own skills. You're figuring out ways of doing new things in interesting ways, but it's not competitive. The other thing is, I think sometimes people worry that older children are going to bully younger children. But the research suggests that except in certain kinds of contexts, such as boarding schools, and certain kinds of contexts, such as certain kinds of school contexts, that children actually are much nicer to one another when they're in an age-mixed environment. So the older children are nice not only to the younger children, because there's something about little children that brings out the caregiving, nurturing instinct, even in other children as well as in adults, but they also become nicer to one another. It's as if it sort of releases this nurturing instinct. There are studies showing that children who have opportunities, even 8 to 14-year-olds in this particular study that I'm thinking of, boys, who have opportunity to interact a good deal of their time with much younger children, are kinder to one another, to other 8 to 14-year-old boys than are those children who don't have those opportunities to interact with young children. So I'm going to bring it to an end at this point. Here's a couple of things that I want to say before concluding. One is also in your packet, you have a sheet that on the top of it says questions and thoughts for afternoon workshop with Peter Gray. So if you're coming to the workshop at 2:30, I believe it starts, that I will be holding, and you get a chance, please fill this out with questions that you have from this morning's talk, and any other questions you might have that you would like me to address at that workshop. And also say something, if you can, about what are the conditions or policies in the Learning Center or in the larger culture that you are involved in that seem to restrict children's freedom to play. Because I don't know what they are here. I know to some degree what they are in the United States or in the UK or in some of the other places that I've been. But I don't honestly know what they are here. And if I just talk about what they are and what to do about them, I may be talking about stuff that is irrelevant to you. So I would like you to do that. And is there a place where people can leave them off? If you can just leave them once you fill it out, leave it off in a pile, maybe where you exit the room, or maybe somebody can give, maybe you'll hear where they're. So then the final thing in conclusion I want to say is that I hope you have convinced you, but I probably didn't need to convince you, you're probably already convinced, that play, especially for young children, is more important than academic training. Academic training should never be an excuse for reducing children's opportunities to play. The most important thing that children should be doing, especially when they're young, but I would argue even as they grow older, is playing, because that is their natural way of learning all these really important things that children have to learn. Thank you very, very much.